Hello and welcome. My name is Okonkwo Emmanuel Chukwunonso and this is OCE Initiative. In OCE Initiative, we are geared towards innovative thinking, concepts that are going to shape the African minds to achieve greatness and to achieve productivity. On today's topic, we are going to be talking about the syndrome that have enveloped the African continent, one that is fast taking away the population of the teeming youth in the African continent, and that is a syndrome, or better termed, the word Japa. What does Japa mean to you? Japa in Nigeria, one of the most populous countries in Africa, Japa is seen as that habit for which the youth elope from African continent into Asia, America, Europe in seek of greener pastures. This very syndrome is fast taking shape in Africa such that African youths are being extracted from the African continent such that the best of them are given to other continents, whereas in Africa, the old are domiciled and the youths are exported. Is this a positive thing or a negative reality that Africa is not seeing, and probably it's going to have its own repercussion in the future? Stay tuned, and this is going to be a robust discussion. Ladies and gentlemen, once again, you're welcome. Hi, you're welcome back. On today's episode, we are going to be talking about a syndrome that has fast taken over the African continent. One that every youth in the African continent is talking about. What is this syndrome? What is this topic? It is none other than the word Japa. What does the word Japa mean to you? It is an acronym used by the African people, especially in Nigeria, to refer to the act of eloping from Nigeria or the African continent to Europe and America in seek of greener pastures. This has become a character amongst the youth in such that in 2017, it is recorded that Africa lost 17 million of its teeming youth population, most of which have skills and talents, and these skills are exported to other continents to serve and to generate value. Is Africa losing its teeming youths? Is Africa going to have a consequence for these youths leaving its shores? It is no longer news that the African youths fancy the idea of leaving the shores of Africa to other continents in seek of greener pastures. One of many of the reasons why these young youths and talented population is leaving the African continent is none other because of the currency value that these countries have. And so these countries, when you're working, even if it's a menial job, the money that you're earning from these countries could actually compete at the same level with professional jobs in countries in Africa, particularly in Nigeria. And so doctors, for instance, in Nigeria are eloping to countries like UK, like Germany, like Ireland, like Australia, even in America, just to practice the same profession. And most times they are paid better because when you convert the currency of these countries in Africa, sometimes you always have surplus money. One that when you work half the year you would have done and worked in Africa, you must have amassed a lot of wealth and a lot of riches for you to retire and retire good. The African government and the African economy has continually suffered the effects of COVID-19 and the effects of some economic meltdown coupled with the war that is going on in Ukraine, and all these things are factoring into the economy of Africa. The African youth and the African people have continually seen economic policies of government. Some are even recorded to be harsh on the people. And so the people are looking for any means necessary and possible to survive. And one of many the idea of Japa came about. The idea that the youth of the African continent are leaving the shores of Africa seeking greener pasture, daily living, and a survival technique in other continents in order to survive both there and sometimes in order for them to create wealth and a sustainable life for them back home. A wise man in a local village said, "I might not have all the riches and the political powers for you to listen to me, but I want you to listen to me still. There is no way Africa is going to shape anything in the international market and in the international foreign policy decision making if Africa continue to depend on the stipends handed over to them by foreign economies. Africa needs to grow, and Africa needs to start producing for itself, creating its destiny and holding its future in its hands." This man happens to be a man who can't be quoted, but the wisdom of his words remains relevant. Africa is one that the whole world have consistently made policies for, but have never made policies for itself. Africa has become a continent that every continent makes decisions for, comes to for businesses and alliances, but Africa has never engineered alliances or even created trade where other continents comes to buy or trade for them and for their interest. Africa, as we speak, sits on the population of 1.2 billion. Are we making great use of this population, or are we simply playing an ineffective role, one that other continents are usurping the great potentials of Africa and making Africa to lose out on its strengths, if not make Africa exaggerate its weaknesses? The question is, why? Why are we losing this great population to the world rather than having these Africans work in Africa? This is one epidemic that we need to stamp today, or it has the potentials of consuming all of us now and in the future. The African economy, from south to east, west to north, has continually battled with poor economic policies and sometimes the lack of unity among African states. Hence, their lack of unity has always been exploited by other continents and other foreign powers in order to make them allies to them rather than allies to themselves. It is worthy to note that it is easier to do business from Nigeria to America than to do business in Nigeria with their neighboring country, Ghana. A man seated in Nigeria, particularly in Lagos, can go online and buy something easily in America and have it delivered to him, even if it's 1 week or 2 days or 3 days or 1 month. But that can be said with someone seated in Nigeria, Lagos precisely, and sit to do trade with someone, for instance, in Ghana. Possibly the infrastructures could be there, but is the trust there? Trade amongst Africa is amongst one of the lowest in the world. The European Union trade amongst itself and prides it as one of their great foreign policy making decisions that they use to thrive and grow progress amongst themselves. The same with the United States of America and even in Asia. Could that be said about the African continent? Why the lack of unity? Africa has become a victim where its teeming youth and population are exported into other continents to go serve, most times do menial jobs, do odd jobs, do jobs that ordinarily would be done by their own indigenes and citizens in those countries. And yet, even in the menial jobs that they do there, the money, when they bring it back home, holds more value than the original currency in the country. In fact, it has even become a norm that those who go out there to other countries like Europe, America to do these menial jobs always come back home looking better, feeling better than the ones who are doing professional jobs in Nigeria. The inflation and the harsh realities of the economy has continually made it worse. If life expectancy in Nigeria has trickled down to 60, and yet it is even becoming harsher for the young, growing population of the youths in Africa to thrive, what could be the fate of these young men and women 10 years from now? It has become a clear case of an emergency situation. An emergency situation that the leaders of the African countries and the African continent need to wake up and start creating policies and making rules and regulations that would help to enhance and grow the confidence the youth would have in the continent and in their countries. It is important to note that colonialism that swept through across the face of African continent have become a case of study amongst the old and the young. One in which people are studying and making sure that such mistakes of colonialism is not repeated in our world today. But it is sad for me to tell you that colonialism still thrives in new ways. Better still put, new colonialism. The new colonialist thought is one where an African young boy who is probably doing a good job in Africa over the next 10 or 20 years would have his counterpart who eloped abroad come back home to look and do and build greater houses, do bigger investment than him who is doing well in Nigeria. Most of these young ones who travel out, some even sell their land, their houses, their assets, their cars, sell off everything just to travel out to these countries. And when they go to these countries, they engage on services, labor, work that sometimes are not befitting of the standard from the country that they come from. Some go there to do cleaning jobs, some go there to do menial jobs that ordinarily you can't find them doing in their host countries. I've seen an ICT expert go abroad to offer healthcare services. I have seen a professional journalist, a professional media reporter go abroad to do security job. Ladies and gentlemen, it is important that we know that if our country and our continent is failing, regardless of our successes in other countries other than ours, we are also failing. And it is therefore important for us to re-energize our hope in building a great African country and continent that we'll be proud of. Japa syndrome, as it is popularly called, is simply a disease that has come to shatter the strength of Africa. And so Africa needs to rise up. Particularly our leaders, we need to find a way to nip this thing on the bud. Suddenly, African continent has gradually tilted to having the old run the government. There is nothing wrong with it. But we must know that if we have relegated leadership to be a thing for the old, then the young is gradually losing interest in nation building. Hence, you look into countries where youths are seen as an asset rather than those who are kept till they get old before they can be looked upon as being qualified to become leaders in their countries. The Japa syndrome has come to end. The Japa syndrome is something that Africa needs to work hard to end. And so I am going to draw out ways that we can end the epidemic of Japa syndrome. The African economy can create a unified currency, one that they can use as a legal tender to do their international deals. And as such, the pool of African unity can create a level playing field for us. This currency should be one that should be adopted by the whole population of 1.2 billion people living in the African continent. One that the man in the Northern Africa, the one in the Western Africa, the one in the Eastern Africa, and the one in the Western Africa would listen and obey to. And we should ensure that we peg that currency to be more than dollar, if not equal to dollar. That way, the African economy will simply work hard to ensure that the unified currency is one that countries that are dealing and exporting value amongst the African country would have their exchange rate meet up to it. By then, the African economy will create a checks and balances amongst itself. One, that only African countries that export value into African economies and African neighbors amongst itself would have value, and their currency would equal to the unified African currency that we have as our trading currency. Africa should learn to produce for itself. It should start with local government producing to consume within the local government. The states creating value and industries and companies to create products that will be consumed within the state. Countries creating values to consume within countries. And the continent creating values amongst itself. Ways that if you need an aircraft, you have an African country that produces it that you need to go to do such trade. Nigeria currently have a company, the Innoson Motors, that produces an automobile. Africa can rally around that company and do business with them to make Innoson a global brand. These habits would help the African economy to create its own negotiating power in the international market, such that the African trade would become a force to reckon with, not one that the European market would always infiltrate into, divide, so that they can always have value from you rather than give to you. Africa should not be seen as a space where people are dashed money, people are handed handouts, and perceived in the international media as beggars and paupers. We are not paupers. If you have been told a lie that Africans are poor, I tell you, that is not true. Africans are amongst the richest, if not categorically the richest in the world. Paper, currency, are simply an imaginary exchange of value, but not value itself. Values are measured according to the treasures that can sustain life. People are treasures, hence they are called human resources. They are a resource. And as we speak today, the African economy has 60% of its population at the climax of the population of the world. As such, no economy in the world, no continent in the world can brag that it has 60% of its population within 13 to 45 years of age, except Africa. And Africa must always understand. And in our decision making, especially internally and externally, it must always be Africa first. If an African man wants to purchase any product, he must ensure that he buys from an African country, not minding that the African product that he is buying might not compete favorably with the ones in the global space. But his patronage is going to put that African product on the map someday. I tell you a story. There was a time in Africa, particularly in the side I am from, Nigeria, that phones that are not manufactured in the United States of America or any European countries are perceived to be inferior. Today, that is not the case anymore. Those countries and continents have over time used their teeming population to patronize their goods and grow in their craft and continually renovate and innovate new ideas across their products, such that they have become the most exported country and products across the world, such that those countries are now producing products even for America and Europe. Africa is not an exception to these rules. Africa should be seen as a population where other economies come to create manufacturing plants, manufacturing industries, use Africa to service the world. The African population should never be seen leaving the shores of Africa to go to form the population for them, build these countries, build these economies, build these industries outside Africa. That is a huge disservice to the African teeming population. African institutions should learn to engage on robust research projects such that our institutions, year in, year out, should be champions of innovations. African institutions are supposed to be our treasure, where the African youth are engaged on sensible and intellectual adventurous projects, one that they are going to study African problems and create a solution for it. Africa can solve its problem, and Africa has all it requires to solve its problem. All we need is a little hope and a little more work put in by Africans for Africa to become great. There is no savior for Africans rather than Africans themselves. No one outside the continent of Africa can take the African problem head on and solve it permanently than an African. And so I charge all African leaders and all African entrepreneurs and inventors to please look the way of Africa. And always remember that Africa is our only home. And if we neglect Africa, Africa will sink. But if we join hands together with a determined mind to solve the Africa problem, I assure you, Africa will be the world paradise yet unseen. Ladies and gentlemen, once again, thank you for listening to me. My name is Okonkwo Emmanuel Chukwunonso, and this is OCE Initiative. Bye for now.